Angela, some of the letters that George wrote you are not revolutionary tracts, but they're love letters in almost the romantic sense. How close were you to George?
Well, we were very close, both as revolutionary comrades and also in a personal sense.
How in a personal sense? How did you get to know each other?
The first time I met him was on the occasion of one of the court appearances in Salinas, California. I had not really expected the scene that confronted me when I walked into that courtroom and sat down and saw coming into the courtroom 3 black men who were chained and shackled. I had never seen black men before with chains all over their bodies. It was certainly reminiscent of slavery.
This was Saturday afternoon, about 5 minutes after 5. And at first I didn't think it was George because it said George Johnson. So I went on with my sewing. And then about 3 or 4 minutes later, they said it was George Jackson, one of the so-called Soledad brothers. Now nobody ever bothered to call me and tell me that he was dead. And it's well, for the past 10 or 11 years, I've expected to hear that he was dead anyway. So, although the shock was there from the radio, I still expected to hear it someday, but not from the radio.
Your son died is fairly well known. Do you believe that? Do you disbelieve that? And do you have any other possibilities? What do you think really
No, I don't believe that because I don't think my son was mad, and I don't think he was an idiot. And I don't think that he would do the things that they said he did. You know, these people have for years gotten away with saying anything that they want to say because they have absolute power over those men. Those men can't even sneeze unless they want them to. They can say anything that they want to say, and we have to take it. You know that. Did they let any of you go in there and find out and talk to the people what happened? You only took their word for what happened. And that's the way it's always been.
What do you think of?
Being an alien has never or seldom made me feel sheepish. In the inclusive sense, my politics, you'll find all of the atypical features of my character. I may run, but all the time that I am, I'll be looking for a stick, a defensible position. It's never occurred to me to lie down and be kicked. It's silly. When I do that, I'm depending on the kicker to grow tired. The better tactic is to twist his leg a little or pull it off if he can. An intellectual argument to an attacker against the logic of his violence, or one to myself concerning the wisdom of a natural counter-violence, borders on, no, it overlaps the absurd. I just don't subscribe to that Superman shit. I've seen too many men cry, seen them in all postures of the common infirmity, death. My message to black people and to sweet, gentle, much-loved people like yourself will be the same message I receive from my brain for myself. It will be the same as long as we have the same problem. It will be the same coming from the living, loving brain or from the grave. A message from the hunted running blacks to those people of this society who profess to want to change the conditions that destroy life. These blacks are still in doubt as to whether those elements across the tracks want this change badly enough to accept the U.S. being physically brought to its knees to attain it. Finally and always, power to the people. George. August 9th, 1970. Real date, 2 days, A.D. Dear Joan, we reckon all time in the future from the day of the man-child's death. Man-child, black man-child with submachine gun in hand, he was free for a while. I guess that's more than most of us can expect. I want people to wonder at what forces created him. Terrible, vindictive, cold, calm man-child, courage in one hand, the machine gun in the other. Scourge of the unrighteous, an ox for the people to ride. Go over all the letters I've sent you. Any reference to Georgia being less than a perfect revolutionary's mama must be removed. Do it now. I want no possibility of anyone misunderstanding her as I did. She didn't cry a tear. She is, as I am, very proud. She read two things into his rage: love and loyalty. I can't go any further. It would just be a love story about the baddest brother this world has had the privilege to meet. And it's just not popular or safe to say I love him. Cold and calm, though.
All right, gentlemen. I'm taking over now.
Jackson then walked through this door, so the authorities say, across the front courtyard of the prison and back to his cell in this block. Exactly what happened inside that block in the next 20 minutes, only a few people know, and most of them are dead. What we do know is that 25 prisoners were released. Then 3 white guards and 2 white inmates were killed. 2 of them had bullet wounds. All of them had their throats cut, with a razor blade embedded in a toothbrush. The alarm was sounded. Jackson ran out of the block and back across the courtyard, gun in hand. The authorities say he was shot twice, in the legs and through the head. He fell here and died, making for this wall 50 yards away and 25 feet high. That's the official version of Jackson's death. It raises several questions. I saw Jackson's body shortly after the shooting. I saw more wounds than the 2 that the authorities had stated. This week, the pathologist finally published his report. Jackson, he said, was shot in the back. The bullet travelled upwards and out through the top of his head. This conflicts with the authorities' story. But yesterday, San Quentin still maintained that Jackson was shot from above, from a gun tower. Who killed George Jackson?
I don't know. I don't know by name, and I wouldn't tell you if I did, because this would be a matter, again, that goes before the courts. But he was killed by rifle fire from one of our arm posts, and if I were to anticipate your next question as to why was he killed, any man with a pistol in his hand running for the wall at this institution, if he was not shot at and either harmed or killed, the officer in the tower would be not doing his duty. That's exactly what he is there for.
I raised my children to love people. I raised them to mingle in American society, but American society didn't want them.
Do you think that George's death was inevitable, given the kind of things he was saying and writing?
They couldn't let him live. Wouldn't be any way possible for them to let him live. He's a black man. They were afraid that people would begin to listen, and they had. People all over the world had begun to listen to George, and I certainly know the people in this country had. That's the reason why they framed him to be murdered the way he was, to try to discredit everything that he had said, to try to paint him as an insane maniac, an animal. That was the reason for it.
Could he be violent?
Only if people were violent to him. I can be violent also, and I imagine so can you. You see, that's the whole story of America. They take their violence and turn it back around on somebody else. I don't have to talk about American violence. You can look all over the world and see American soldiers everywhere fighting in other people's countries and killing them. So if I were running the country in America, I wouldn't open my mouth about violence. As many people as they've murdered in Vietnam in the past 10 years, And they're going to talk about violence. There's many black people that get killed every day in this country and nobody knows or cares. And they're going to tell me about violence, how they wiped out a whole nation of Indians, and they're going to say something to me about violence. I don't want to hear it.
The Minister of Defense of the Black Panther Party and a servant of the people, Huey P. Newton.
Power to the people, power to our fallen comrade, Brother George Jackson, member of the Black Panther Party. First, I would like to explain, because many people wonder, what was the connection between Brother George Jackson and the Black Panther Party. When I went to prison in 1967, I met George. When George was murdered in San Quentin, I suddenly realized that after years of conditioning himself, the prison officials had been branded with a force to respect him, because even in death he was their hero. They claimed that he killed 5 men and wounded 3 in approximately 30 seconds. This is impossible practically, but I like to accept it anyway because George is my hero. That even they would say he could do this impossible thing, and then they say he headed for the wall. The wall that's, I don't know, some 30 feet high, and that they say they murdered him because he was heading for that wall. He was gonna, maybe he would escape. He would have to scale that wall and fly over it. And I can't accept this practically, but I have to admit that accepting George as my hero and my stand, it will be necessary for us to do this. We have to either knock down or crush the wall of exploitation and oppression is very, very great. And the oppressed is very, very afraid. He's afraid that we have this Superman power, that we can do it. And we will raise our children to be like George Jackson, to live like George Jackson, and to fight for freedom as George Jackson fought for freedom. We say that even after death, George Jackson still is alive because his ideas, his spirit will be manifested in the physical. Again, we see our young Panthers here who are growing up, and they will grow up, trying to live by the standard that George Jackson set. By this, George left a legacy, and he will go on.
Of course we need babies to help fight the protracted wars. Some of the Conrads have different opinions on this question in principle, which would be, why should we allow this to happen to anyone else? But I support war on the family plan. The Vietnamese have 6-year-old mind planners. I think if I had been on the street from age 18 to 24, I would probably be a dope fiend or a small stakes gambler or humping the ground.
George certainly died in a significant way, and his death will be very heavy. While the ones that fell that day in San Quentin, their death will be lighter than a feather, because it's insignificant, and even those who support them now will not support them in the future, because we're determined to change their mind. We'll change their mind, or else in the people's name, we would have to wipe them out thoroughly, wholly, absolutely, and completely. All power to the people.